Welcome back to the Hockey Coach Podcast. I'm here today with Matt Corthius. You can find Matt at Hockey Pro Training on all social media. I'm Kevin Muller. You can find me at Kevin M2 Hockey on social media. And today we have a pretty interesting topic. We're hitting the off season right now, so we're going to talk about how do you develop and design a skill drill. So obviously in the spring and summer, you spend a lot of time working on the individual skills for your game. So now we're going to talk about, from a coaching standpoint, how do you actually approach the drill that you're going to go into. And so, Matt, you just recently finished up a stick handling series that went out online. And I thought it was interesting. I was watching some of your videos, and I think it's really interesting how you came up with that, how you really laid out a very nice progression with that stick handling. So maybe we start with, what was because that's a straight skill. So why don't we talk a little bit about how you came up with that plan and how you sort of worked that progression?
That's actually a great question, and not one I thought we were going to get into right off the bat, but I like it. I like it because there was a lot of thought that went into it. And sometimes it's hard to say, bad to say as a coach, but you just kind of make a practice plan to make a practice plan. And you see a lot of that with new coaches. They'll just throw something together just to throw something together and just get it done and get out there. But I thought for this, since it was something that people would be using and trying to use it to improve their game, that there should be some type of a structure to it. And with everything I like to do is I like to really start with the basics, right? And then just you can always grow and evolve a plan or a program from there. So that was kind of my thinking with that, because I think oftentimes, especially in today's social media world where you see all these super flashy drills and amazing players and NHL guys going through drills a million miles an hour, backhand towies and all this stuff, you forget that a majority of the players are level 1, level 2 basic players that are maybe looking for help, right? A lot of the NHL guys, they're not looking for help. They're good. The top coaches aren't looking for help. They're good. But the beginner level, the basic level player is still looking for a lot of help. So that's who I was kind of focusing it on. And there's a lot of things when it comes to stick handling that it's hard for me to say, but I just learned when I started coaching the technical side of stick handling, right? Your top hand doing the work, your bottom hand being a little looser, stuff like that. I always knew how to stick handle, but I didn't really know how to cue people and teach people how to do that. So that's something I was looking for, and I designed that stick handling course. Just start with the basics and add upon that as you go. And then after you have those basics mastered from a stationary position, I kind of added some movement to the drills, right? So I would do the same things that I did stationary, now skating, because as we all know, the game of hockey is played while you're moving. You're very rarely going to be stationary, stick handling the puck. So you got to be able to make those moves, make those fakes, and make those different dangles at medium to top speed, right?
Yep, absolutely. And I like what you say too about like understanding the audience, right? Because I think that's number one anytime you're designing a skill. So yeah, I mean, for the majority of players you're going to work with, a stationary move is first, and then you add speed, and then you add either a decision or you add in some pressure, right? And you start to execute that, and you start to put it into a game scenario. And that's really kind of your progression is, basic / slow, add speed, add decision making, add pressure, apply to a game scenario.
Absolutely. And those are a few of the things I was kind of thinking about moving forward for the next kind of series of drills. How do we take what we just learned here and now apply it specifically to the game, right? And I think as my coaching is evolving, that's more what I'm thinking about when it comes to practice planning and quote unquote skill development. How can I take this particular skill we've just learned and apply it to a specific situation in a game, right? Instead of just hammering through drills and hammering through all this stuff, let's now try to apply it to the game, right? How do I apply this stick handling move to a situation? So in a lot of times during the course, I would say, if you find yourself in this spot, now you can do this move to get yourself to the next spot, right? And not just, let's do 1,000 toe drags today just to do 1,000 toe drags, but how is it applicable to a game situation?
Yeah, absolutely. I'm a big proponent too of doing, even when you're in the stationary / very slow phase, of doing whenever possible the maneuver in an area that you'll use it in the game. Mm-hmm. So rather than doing toe drags, below the goal line or behind the net where it's a less likelihood of it happening, add that with your feet facing into the zone, near the blue line, right? Where you're making the move on a zone entry where you're going to progress into, right? If you're working on a simple pivot, there's no point to add pivots. If the guy's a forward, why not add that pivot at the hash marks so they're actually also working on a breakout sequence, right? Like that. Yeah. That always kind of drives me nuts is when you see the seemingly randomly placed, skill drill where it's just so easy to tie that into something that happens.
And then come game time when that player's in that spot, it feels more natural to him, right? Because he's done it 100 times instead of just straight down the wall, straight back down the middle, right? And that's just something you kind of made me think of as you said that the hockey players are creatures of habit, right? Not always the smartest, sorry guys, but once they get used to doing something, they're used to doing something. So if they're coming off the wall in that pivot position, making a toe drag in practice, they're more likely to be able to pull that move off come game time. And that's what we want.
Right. And skill acquisition is habit based, right? Yeah. It's just muscular repetition and getting that sequence together. So if they now are comfortable in that area of the ice executing that drill, they're not even thinking about it. So you're actually giving them extra without even telling them what you're doing, right? I think that's an important part for a coach to do is have that foresight to say, you know what, we're going to do it in this area because now when we go to actually move into a higher speed or a game situation or a decision or a pressure situation, you're already comfortable making this maneuver in this area.
Absolutely. And I think something that it's interesting to look at my own kind of coaching evolution is I'm probably 3 years into it now. And first, when I got into it, I had no idea what I was doing. Zero. I was at zero. I've told people before, I was kind of a natural player, a grinder, a hustler. I'd be the power play guy in front of the net taking chops because I was tall and had good hands. And my technical side of the game wasn't my strong suit, right? I was good in practice so I could listen, I could understand the drill, and I could do it. But when it came to putting a practice plan together, organizing it properly, having the correct progressions in place, that has always been a challenge for me. It still is to this day. So I find it interesting to see the way I've thought about practice planning and thought about drill progressions and stuff like that. So I'm going to throw a question to you, and something I think about all the time is, say you get a new team you're working skills with, right? Someone calls you out of the blue. It's let's just, for example's sake, say it's a Pee Wee AA team, right? They say, hey, Kevin, we want you to come out work with our group, have you out for 5 sessions. Where do you start? That's always something I think about because that happens to me like a lot. Like, we want to hire you to come do 5 sessions. Where do I start? It's always something that's a tricky one in my mind.
I think it starts with a question to the current coaches or whoever's asking you. Obviously, if somebody's hiring you, hopefully they have kind of an idea and vision for what they're trying to get out of it, right? Mm-hmm. And for me personally, a lot of times when I get those calls, it's to work on skating, right? So the first thing I'm going to do is kind of figure out, do they agree with it? Do they see something, right? Because at the end of the day, you're walking into that, and even if you get a chance to see them beforehand, your perspective on them is limited. Mm-hmm. Where the coaches probably have, 60, if they've been with the team for a long time, hundreds of games to reference and practices to reference. So they can kind of give you a starting point. If it's completely up to me, then you know what, I'm probably going to work on skating anyway, because I'm a firm believer if you can't skate, you can't do anything tactically and anything else. So if you can't get to that puck on time and quickly and efficiently, then the rest of it's kind of a wash. You could be the best shot in the world, but if you can't skate there and get there, who cares, right? So I always try to find a way to do a little background checking on the team and figure out, in the States, there's hockey rankings for AA and AAA teams and high school teams. Maybe that's a discussion for a different podcast in terms of what those rankings mean in terms of teams and all that stuff. But, it'll give you an idea. Are you working with a team that's, top in the country? Or are you working with a team that just got off a season that hasn't, won more than a dozen games? And, I think if you have a team in that case who hasn't won a lot of games, you got to find a way to keep it fun for them, right? You're a fresh voice, you're a little breath of fresh air. You get to come in and work skills, but also hopefully change your perspective. If you're working with a top team, I can tell you what, having fun's important, but you also want to make sure you're going to keep that competitive environment and that high speed environment, right? That most likely is already being bred by the coaches. So I think you have to understand what environment they're coming from and adapt a little bit. And to me, it's always about asking questions, and figuring out, and if you can, go watch the kids a couple weeks before, if you can see a game, if you can see maybe a practice, if they're a local program. I mean, the little cues you'll pick up just by watching a game or a practice in terms of body language and habit, and it really helps you design it. But, at the end of the day, anytime a guy hires a skills coach, I think, unless you're specifically saying like, Matt, I want you to work on stick handling, I think there's got to be skating components to it. Like, I think fundamental edge work is very much missed and under-taught at this point in most youth hockey.
Yeah, that's something I was going to jump on right away, and something I would always do. And I know it's boring, and I know it's not exciting, and I know it's always cool to watch, but get right after those basics right away. And just, who knows what the coach has been doing all year? Who knows if the kids have lost those habits? Who knows if they've forgot what the basics look like? But if you're not playing at the top level of your age group, or even if you are, those basics still apply to pretty much 80% of the kids. I notice when I work with the team, you can run through a basic inside edge drill with a double A team or a single A team, and you'll see that 75 to 90% of the kids can't do it, quote unquote, perfectly or as they should be doing it, right? So I think it's always great to start with those basics. It's not fancy. It doesn't look cool on Instagram, but like, hey, that's where the team's at. That's where you got to start. You can't do the fancy, more exciting stuff unless you get those basics hammered down. And I think you also touched on a good point. If you're coming into a team and you don't know them, you're not familiar with them, to bring a good attitude, be positive, be that presence on the ice that the kids need to learn from, right? I always found that to be something that helped me as a coach early on, that maybe I didn't have the experience or the knowledge, but I would show up with a fantastic attitude. My energy would be on fire. My positivity would be where it should be. And the kids would just be ready to go. And I think that's something that some coaches miss the odd time, is when you show up with that bad attitude, you show up lazy, you show up tired, you show up not wanting to be there. What do you think your players are going to do? Right? I have coaches ask me all the time, well, my guys aren't excited about practice. They're not fired up about this. They're not fired up about that. And I'm like, well, are you fired up about these things? And he's like, well, no. Well, what do you expect, right? It's like having a kid. If you're going to walk around mumpy dumpy all day and grouchy, your kid's going to do the same thing. So you got to be the leader out there. You got to be the guy in control, and that's just going to start your practice off on the right foot, no matter what team you're working with.
Yeah, attitude runs downhill. So if the top of the pyramid has a bad attitude, guess what's going to happen? It's going to trickle down, and you're going to get exactly what you're putting into it. So there is a certain energy level, and you know what? As coaches, it's hard. It's hard sometimes. That's okay. There's nothing wrong with it being difficult. It's just the thing of, you have to be conscious of what you're portraying, right? I mean, if you work a regular job, you might have had a terrible day at work, and then, now all of a sudden you're on the ice and, the kids are a little squirrely, so you're just in a terrible mood, and you bag skate them. Well, guess what? Now you got 20 kids that are in a bad mood.
Yeah. And you got nothing out of that practice.
You got nothing out of it, right? So there is the human element to it, but definitely being aware of, what you're bringing every time you hit the ice is huge. And are you going to be perfect as a coach? Am I perfect as a coach? No, absolutely not. But, it is something that I try to consciously go through my head before I get going. Is like, all right, where am I at today? Geez, I got 2 hours of sleep. I'm a 5 out of 10 in terms of energy. But here's the part I can control. Mm-hmm. Right. So, I think that's often underlooked. And, you did touch on one thing I wanted to say when you're talking about the basic edges and just fundamentals, and you said it's not fun. I can agree with that to some point, but I think one thing with the fundamental stuff is that the biggest difference might be made because you say something different than I do.
100%.
Right? Because kids all learn different ways. They don't always understand your terminology. It doesn't connect with them. But maybe I say something this way and player A understands it better, but Matt describes the exact same thing, right, a different way, and player B understands it better. And that also goes back to the function of, you can run the same drill. Matt and I can run the same drill and get two drastically different results, because it's how we communicate with the players, right? So skill development coaching is probably even more a function of developing a relationship with a player so that you can actually create that dialogue and make them better.
100% agree. I think if you don't have that connection with the player, they're not going to listen to you like they are if you do have that connection with the player, right? I've had this happen a million times where the kid will be with one coach and the dad will say, well, he's not getting much from him, but he seems to get a little bit more from you. Is that because I'm a better coach or I have more experience or knowledge? It's usually not. It's usually because I developed that connection with the kid and he now wants to put out more and work harder for me because we've developed that connection. We have that bond and now he's listening. Now he's paying attention because, especially for younger kids, half the battle is paying attention. Half the battle is getting them to listen to you. Half the battle is having them respect you. Half the battle is having them not playing sword fights in line and tripping their buddy and goofing off, right? And if you don't have that respect and presence as a coach, you're going to have a lot of that to deal with. And I've been in these situations where I was running tryouts or skill sessions and there was someone coming on after me and they say, well, man, that group was all over me last night. Like, do you have any advice? Like, what drills or skills to do? And I said, man, it's not even about the skills or drills. You got to command that group and have a presence on the ice before you even get into that, or the skills and drills aren't even going to matter, right? So depending on the age group, that's something you really got to think about and focus on, is having the respect, having the presence, and making sure your players are ready to go and in a good place to listen to you and listen to what you have to say.
Yeah, and I think one of the key starting points for earning that respect is showing your preparation when you walk through the door. And that's been a thing that I know, like, I always strive for it. I've gotten players that came to my team for no other reason than they've seen me around the rink, because at every event that's anywhere within a 4 or 5 hour radius, I'll drive to go watch it and just go watch players, be there to support the guys that are playing for me. And obviously in that time, if you're watching hockey, you're going to see guys that are playing on other teams. And, for whatever reason, if they end up in a situation where they don't want to stay where they're at, and they can pick up the phone and there's a certain comfort level, right? And they know you're prepared. They know you're invested. They know you're there to support them first. So you have to show that caring before you can command respect. And that's one thing that I see a lot of coaches do, is they try to just be the authoritative respect. And you know what, at the end of the day, it works with some kids, but the majority, I don't think it's very effective. I think that respect and that presence, so to speak, is earned. I think a big part of it is, unfortunately, your voice when you're on the ice. You have to be confident in what you're saying. And some of us have strong voices, we can yell a lot louder, and that is helpful. Like, you can't really control that, so to speak, but it is helpful to have that little bit of a, right, that just be able to puncture that moment and get their attention. But I'll tell you what, here's how I always say, you've got your group when they're messing around, and all you have to do is look at them and it stops.
Yeah.
And you make eye contact, they look back at you and they go, okay, my bad.
Yeah.
In their heads.
100% agree. I've never had a way to communicate that voice where it's like, I don't yell at the kids. My wife always says, well, how do you get their attention? How do they listen to you like that? There's just like a tone that goes from like a 6 to a 7 when it's time to pay attention, right? I'm not going to yell at them, but my voice, the tone is going to go up and they're going to listen. And now it's time to pay attention, right? We're never really going to get to an 8. I don't think screaming at them works. I have a kid now. Sometimes my temper gets to me and he gets to me. And I know the more I scream, the louder I get. It doesn't get any better. Just because my voice gets louder and I scream doesn't mean, okay, daddy, now I'm going to stop. Obviously he's 2 and it's a lot different, but still, you see coaches just sometimes, I remember how I was trained as a kid. There was a lot of yelling. You know what I mean? There was a lot of screaming. There was a lot of garbage can kicking. There's a lot of that old school coaching mentality that, it might work sometimes, but like, you're not going to intimidate your players into working harder. You're not going to scare them into working harder. You might, maybe, 2 out of 10 kids work that way, but I don't think so. I've kind of found that the respect way goes a lot farther than the yelling and the screaming. So that's a great point. I think preparation is a great point. It's something that it's been invaluable to me. I know when I first started coaching, I've talked about this before, I would just get coaching jobs based on my hockey career, my experience. And I would literally show up to these jobs coaching like a novice or an Adam team, barely prepared. I would have nothing done. I thought I could just do it. I literally just thought you could just show up and coach a hockey team. And I would get out there, and as soon as I'd step foot on that ice, I would be so nervous. I would be so anxious. All these people are looking at you, and you're just like, I'm not prepared. What do I do, right? And then you freeze. But what I found is, I know every experienced coach will find the same thing, that if you're prepared, your confidence is through the roof. I've shown up to practices and skills group where I was nervous because it was a new group. It was a more experienced group. But as soon as I hit that ice, as soon as those kids were looking at me, my confidence is through the roof because I was prepared. I didn't have to think, right? It's just like playing a game. I always tell kids to like visualize the game before the game is played. So when you get out there, you're not going to think, you're not going to worry, you're not going to be nervous. You've already done it in your mind. So same thing applies to coaching, right? It's preparation is, I think it's more than half the battle, right? Because sometimes what happens is you can have a plan that's perfect, but say a drill goes wrong or the kids don't get it. Now what? You got to move on to that next drill, that next skill before things get haywire, things are off the rails, and you keep things in line, keep things moving smoothly, right? So I'd say preparation is like 75% of the battle.
Yeah, preparation is key. You'll never have a perfect practice plan. So I think that's important to accept right out of the gate. But what it does is it allows you to put your brain power, right? And we all have 100% of brain power. It allows you to put it towards what's actually happening in front of you versus what do I have to run next? Mm-hmm. And that's a difficult spot. And I will say, like, I know for me personally, it's gotten easier through the years to sort of pivot mid. I was going
to say that as you grow, as you learn, as you're more prepared, you can pivot and move. And if things are messed up, you don't worry about it so much because you know you can just shift it to the next thing. And that's just what experience brings you, right?
Yep, absolutely. But at least you're not thinking about that while the current drill is going on. You're able to correct. You're able to evaluate, help, teach, right? And that's, I think, the most important part is making those corrections within the skill drill. And that's a huge mistake that I watch a lot of guys make. And this is going to kind of lead me into a little bit of a rant. And I definitely want you to chime in here, Matt. But YouTube coaching. And when I say that, I'm saying it as it's so easy now. We have access to so much information, and your channel has hundreds of videos. My channel has hundreds of videos. You can literally go on and type in, backwards crossover, and you can get videos that pop up and understand how to do it. But it doesn't make you a good coach to just do that and understand it. What makes you a good coach is learning how to go in and actually break it down. It's knowing where to actually piece that skill into the progression. Mm-hmm. That's the difference, right? And you see the ones that I've actually just started kind of unfollowing a ton of accounts that have been posting all these like super flashy drill videos. They're great. They look, but it's dog and pony show. Mm-hmm. It's not what it's about, right? And somebody's going to take that drill now and go run it with their, third Pee-wee team who has no business running it because in the video is, an AHL or D1 player, NHL player executing it, and it's flashy. It looks cool. There's nothing wrong with that. It's fun to post, and I'm not knocking posting it, but I'm saying be very cautious when you grab those videos and say, oh, I love this. Mm-hmm. And I'm going to tell you why. Like, I still watch a lot of them. To me, my Instagram feed's been like flooded with those lately. So I've hung on to a few, but I'll watch them and I'll look for like a skating maneuver, right? And I'll look for maybe a different direction that he's cutting, and if I know I'm working with an athlete on zone entry, I don't know why I keep going to that, but I'm going to keep going with that topic. If I'm working with an athlete on zone entry, I'm going to watch some of the drills. And if I see guys, running drills where it's entering the blue line, I'm going to kind of analyze that. Like, all right, here's what I've been running. Here's what he's running. Interesting. What are the differences between it? Is there a tweak here? Is there a skating maneuver that I see within this that would actually be a good progression, a good piece to the puzzle to add in? Or, hey, I know that's coming up in 2 weeks. I know I haven't got there yet, but it's fun to see. And maybe I'll save that video and I'll show it to the athlete when I work on that.
Mm-hmm. Great point, and a great topic to bring up because I think myself, when I was newer to coaching, was very guilty of this, right? I had no information. This is another reason I started the Hockey Pro Training thing in the first place, was to try to share more information with coaches and share more ideas and just get more stuff out there. And as social media grows and as all of this stuff grows, it's kind of gotten a little bit crazier than I envisioned it starting out with. But I was guilty of this at the start. I would have no idea what to do. I'd have nobody helping me, but I'd have to now plan a practice. So what do you do, right? What do you do? I'd go to your website, which is a great resource. I'd go to your YouTube page and other YouTube pages. But even back 4 years ago, there wasn't that many good YouTube pages sharing information. So what I would do, I would just find, 6 or 7 drills, piece them together on my practice plan, and that's what I would go run through. Like, I would literally do that. And I was that guy where I'm like, that's a cool drill. I'm going to go run this with a bunch of Pee-wee AA kids. Sorry to throw the Pee-wee AA kids under the bus, but that's just the group that keep just like whatever, an average Pee-wee team, right? That can't do the drills that I was seeing on YouTube done super well. So I think that's a good learning tool for coaches as well, to find these drills, look at them. But like you said, Now that you have this drill, you have to now think for yourself, right? Think of where your team's at. Think of where your players are at. Take a piece of that drill maybe, and then scale it back if you have to, or scale it forward if you have to, depending on where things are at. And it's an interesting point. And as the social media gets crazier and crazier, you see more of this going on. It's super flashy. It's super easy to find drills now, right? Where like 5 years ago, 6 years ago, no one was sharing drills. Coaches were very close to the vest. If they had a cool practice plan or a drill, they weren't really big into sharing the drill, right? It was kind of like a hidden secret. They had kind of the answer, whatever it may be. But like you said, you can't just take like Sidney Crosby's practice plan and apply it to your team's practice plan. You have to train your team where they're at, not where they want to be. And I think the unlimited access to information is awesome, but you also have to be careful with how you use that information. And as a coach myself, it's something that I've definitely had to learn as I've gone through. And it's something I'm still evolving with and still working on.
Yeah, you hit the nail on the head. Coaches in the beginning are tight with their with their drills and with their practice plans. And then as they like get going, they realize that really those are irrelevant. Like, and I tell people this all the time. I'm like, you want my practice plans? You want my drills? I don't care. I'll send them to you. Mm-hmm. Because I know the value in the drill is how you run it. It's not the drill, right? The drill itself doesn't, I mean, does the drill matter? Yeah, of course it matters, but it's not the secret sauce. Mm-hmm. The secret sauce is how you teach it, how you run it, how you force your players to execute within that drill. The pieces that are important, right? And the pieces that are part of the progression that you're trying to teach your team that are in that drill. So, if you're trying to do an overspeed drill, but you haven't mastered basic outside edges, well, the second there's a change of direction in an overspeed drill, kids can't get it. So you can have that drill. It's great. And it might look really cool. And you can stack 15 pads up and, have them belly slide under one of them and jump over a net. And throw your stick, do all that stuff. But if it doesn't make sense in the scheme of development, then you need to really rethink it. It's just not appropriate.
Yeah. I think thinking for yourself is key when it comes to these kind of things, and not being so concerned about how good it looks, how flashy it looks and stuff like that, right? It's the social media world. It's kind of it's where we're at. Like when we started coaching, this wasn't what it was. It's completely different from when I started coaching to where it is now, right? And for you, you were like the only guy on YouTube. There's probably 2 other guys on YouTube when you started probably that were actually making tutorial style videos that were supposed to be helping people learn things as opposed to just showing off your camp or showing off how good your players are, right? So it's an interesting time we live in, that's for sure. And it seems like every coach is now on Instagram, and that's a good thing. I think it's awesome to have more ideas, more thoughts, more people sharing stuff like that. But at the same time, you have to be careful to not just try to go for the dog and pony show, as you said.
Yeah, absolutely. And one topic we didn't really touch a lot on yet is sort of the small group / individual training, which is, it's huge in the States. I can't speak on Canada. I'm sure it's the same. Yeah. But it's a super intriguing market, and I think it's a much different coaching style, right? Because you have to engage one player, one athlete, or 3 athletes, or 2 athletes. And you have to engage them for 45 minutes or an hour, and you have to make it, again, you have to keep the same things in mind. You have to progress, you have to understand where they're at, and you have to communicate. And you have to communicate arguably even more. And one of the things that I learned probably about 5 years ago, I picked this up and I couldn't even tell you where I got it, but one of the best questions to ask your athletes in those scenarios when you're in a real small group is have them do a rep and then ask them the question, what did you feel? Right? So if you're working on inside edges and the kid, falls, what'd you feel before you fell? What's going on? Like and the younger they are, you have to guide them a little bit, obviously, with the questions. But once you start getting with older athletes, with, your midget, your junior, your college, your pro guys, then you can have a very meaningful dialogue right away, because they're going to tell you, well, I felt the weight shift, too far back on my heel. It got behind my heel. Yep. And then what happened? Well, I was looking at the lighting.
I really like that, because what it does is it forces the player to think, right? And just looking back at my career, how many times did I ever think about those things when I was playing hockey? Never. I would sit there on my knee. I would look at the coach drawing up the drill. And for me, for whatever reason, I was really good at seeing the drill. It was in my head. I'm going to go to the front of the line. I'm going to do the drill. But I was never thinking about the things you just mentioned. Where's the weight? How's my edge? Where's my balance point? Stuff like that. So I think that's awesome and an awesome little tidbit to get players thinking and just get that dialogue going as well, right? I think the more you talk, the more I talk to you, and the more you talk to anybody, you're always going to learn something if you're paying attention, right? And I think for players on the ice, man, how many times you have a 7 a.m. practice and you've got a bunch of 12, 13, 14, 15-year-olds, and they're not half asleep. They are asleep. You know what I mean? And so to get that conversation going, get their mind going, make them think, make them have a purpose for being there and not just burning through the hour, I think is super valuable, because I know I've burned through a lot of hours just because the kid was half asleep or whatever it may be, right? You want to get the most out of that hour and get the most out of that kid and get him thinking. Get him thinking next time he's on the ice in a game and you're not there. What do we talk about? Why is this happening? How can I improve this? So I think that's a great point.
And if you're talking about skating skill, the example I gave, if you can break down the feeling that you felt on your skate, you can usually backtrack the bigger issue, right? Because the skate's usually caused by what? Your hips are out of line, your knees aren't bent, your shoulders are trailing, your stick's trailing, your head's looking the wrong direction, right? You can kind of backtrack that. So making them kind of, interact with you is part of the wake up process if it's an early morning skate, but the engagement process, right? But then having them kind of think and go, my knees were bent, so it wasn't that, right? Then what happened? Well, I feel like I started sliding before, so maybe my hips were turned, a little bit out. They were shifted, so my edge started to catch. Whatever that is, it just forces them into that thought process.
Yeah, I think it's more the engagement process I like about that. Just for myself, maybe other players are different. I'm sure everybody's different, but I'm just never thinking like that when I'm on the ice training. Never. Now I am all the time. That's all I'm thinking about, right? When I'm working on a shooting video, what did I learn about shooting today? How is my shot feeling? Not just trying to regurgitate something I heard from another coach, but what am I actually feeling when I'm shooting this puck? And that's kind of how I've been coaching and doing my videos as of late. I'll shoot a bunch of pucks or I'll do a bunch of stick handling and then think to myself, what am I feeling? How is this working? As opposed to when I started coaching, I'd watch a bunch of videos, I'd go to clinics, I'd learn different things, and then I would just regurgitate what I was taught, right? That's probably how we all learn in some sense, right? It's just kind of how it goes. But I think the key is to get to a place where you're teaching yourself almost. You're taking what the coach says, you're absorbing it, but then thinking for yourself, what do I got to do here?
Right. I think as coaches, we're crazy to think that we won't learn, much like the athletes.
Absolutely.
And there's times where I'll sit in the synthetic shooting lane and I'll just play around and work on feeling. I'll change one thing and go, ooh, okay, that definitely is not a positive tweak, or this is an interesting, right? We're no different. Just because we're coaches doesn't mean our learning process stops. Mm-hmm. And you might work with, I'll tell you what, I say this all the time, hopefully to my athletes, I say, hopefully you're learning from me, but I guarantee I'm learning from you. Because 100%. Player A does not learn and respond the same way that player B does, right? And so you have to be better. You have to take that feedback and they're going to make different mistakes too. So finding that way to identify them and correct them, that's the fun part. But if you're not going through it yourself and playing with that skill yourself and trying to be better yourself, then you're going to have a much more difficult time relating, and not only relating, but identifying the issues you're seeing within that drill.
Yeah, and also growing as a coach as well, right? You want to be able to look at that practice session and be like, what went well there? What worked well? How did the player respond to this? How did he respond to that? Did this sequence go well? Whatever it is, right? Because you're always, like you said, you're always trying to grow as a coach. I think the second you think you have it all mastered, it's the second you're falling behind. And I think it's a habit people can get into. For me, it's not really an issue because, like I said, I'm still kind of new to this. So I think when you just put yourself in the process of learning and you tell yourself you're in a lot better place than trying to be a super expert. And we had a few coaches on the last post I made podcast talk about how come all these off-ice guys now think they're experts, and how come everyone thinks they're an expert and they've never actually played the game. And I think it's an interesting kind of topic to speak about, how the social media world has turned more people into quote-unquote experts, right? And I think that's something I try to stay away from and try not to ever say something is just a hard and fast rule, or this is how you do this, or this is how you do that, or whatever, because I'm still not experienced enough to do so. And even if I was, I don't think I would speak on a topic like that, because things always do change and things evolve, and sometimes you're wrong, and sometimes it's player specific, and sometimes there's a lot of other factors that go into this. And so what do you think about today's, I'll turn this into a question, today's social media world in terms of coaching and not only just skills coaching, but everything. Like the most frustrating thing for me is sometimes watching these off-ice videos, not really in the hockey world, but just fitness related in general. But what are your thoughts on the current situation with the social media coaching world?
I think it's frustrating that you have a lot of people who don't put content out, but feel the ability and need to critique.
Yeah.
And my issue on that is, hey, listen, I'm not telling you I'm perfect by any stretch. Heck, there's YouTube videos of me 10 years ago out there, and I look at it and there's parts that I would completely redo or completely scrap or 180 degrees. But that's part of the evolution process. What I like about that is that's in history. Like that's on there, that's online, right? Like that's cool. It's fun for me to go back then and actually look at it. My thing is, if you have enough time to go out and critique somebody else who's actually doing work, you probably have enough time to film something or at least chime something productive. And so, it's one of those things where when you put yourself out there, and I'm sure we'll get comments on the podcast, saying we're idiots or something like that, and people won't like the content we do. And that's great. That's great. For me, like I learned very, very quickly because like you say, I was one of the early guys in the sort of tutorial video world in the hockey side. You just learn to ignore it. You learn to look in there to see if there's actually some value to what they say. And, if it's just a straight hate comment, then just let it go. I mean, what are you going to do? Everybody's entitled to their opinion, and, maybe they're having a bad day at work. So, you're an easy target, and that's okay. I think it's easy to get caught up in the conversations and the drama that happen on social right now. And I would just much rather spend my energy focusing on how to do something productive, do something
100%.
that contributes or makes myself better.
Yeah, I think it's that 95-5 rule where it's always 95% positive, and that 5% will really get to you, and you'll be like, oh man, like that was a pretty rude comment. But I don't know. I think as you are online more and more, for me, it's the same way. I don't get a ton of hate comments, but you get them here and there, and you try to look at them and say, okay, like you said, in that comment, which I wish the coach maybe would have worded better, is there something I can learn from that and better myself on? Because you should always be looking at your videos objectively and thinking, like you said, I'm not perfect. I know I'm not perfect, but can I learn something from that comment? And I know I had a video I posted maybe a year and a half ago, and some coach came on and just destroyed it. It was a shooting video, and just destroyed it. And in the moment, I was just like, kind of like, F this, who's this guy? You know what I mean? Like just the way he worded the whole comment, I was just like, I couldn't believe it. I was like, so I looked him up, and he was a reputable coach. I thought, that's interesting. And it upset me for like a couple minutes. But then I actually read the comment. I actually watched the video, and I thought to myself, he's right. He's right. Did he need to kind of go about it in a dickish way? Probably not, but I'm 35 years old. It's not going to hurt my feelings for that long. But he was right. And I think there's always something to be learned from any conversation. Like you said, it's probably better to spend your time either maybe not criticizing in a nice way, or maybe just giving positive, like valuable feedback, I should say, right? You can always criticize something anybody does, but why not take that 5 minutes to say, hey man, great video. Maybe you could try doing it this way, right? For me as a coach a year and a half ago, that would have been so much more valuable than saying, this is the worst video I've ever seen. Everything you're doing is wrong. This is horrendously bad. Right? Where's the value in that for me or the people following me, right? Because they see that comment and they think, okay, whatever. But if you would have said, hey, maybe try doing this, I improve as a coach, the people following me improve, it's a win-win, right? And I think if you're that sensitive where you can't take any feedback, then you're in the wrong game, right? You should not be sharing stuff. You should get out of the game. Don't even do it, right? Because sometimes that happens. People can't take any criticism. I'm open for criticism. Let's go. I want to learn. I want to grow. I want to get better every single day. But if your criticism comes with you being a dick and you trying to like flex your ego, I don't really have a whole lot of time for that. But I think if it's a valuable comment, it's going to help me. It's going to help my followers. Let's go. Right? I want to learn. I want to get better.
That's it. And I think any coach who sort of is going to go somewhere in this game in terms of like being progressive and continuing to improve themselves, I think almost all of them are open to conversations. Mm-hmm. Like there's nothing I like better than having a good hockey talk, right?
Oh, like great. I'll
go grab coffee with another coach and just BS and talk. You talk through stuff and you think about stuff and you bounce ideas off each other and you grow. That to me is what what coaching is about, right? Our job as a coach is to improve the players, but at the same time, we have to grow too. We can't expect the players to put in the work if we're not willing to put the work in ourselves to be better at what we are. And so now, since you got to throw me under the bus with a question, I get to throw you under the bus with one question, Matt.
Shoot.
One skating skill and one shooting skill that is under taught right now.
That's a fantastic question. I'm just going to think for myself. I think there's you see a lot of the edge work stuff going on right now, right? You'll see all the inside edge drills and the jumping on the outside edge drills. I think to break down the forward stride and get the proper technique and the proper form and the proper mechanics is something I see being undertaught maybe in life and on social media, right? Because it's not flashy, but you see it like for me as a coach, I saw a video the other day by a guy named Skate with Power, and he kind of broke down the arm swing and everything involved. And I thought that is a good video. That to me is helpful, right? It's not going to get a gazillion views, but I think there's so many ways people can skate stylistically speaking, right? But I think to really break down that forward stride and have that basic power element figured out is super important. So that's what I'm going to go with right now. What did you say? A shooting skill?
Yep, and then a shooting skill. Yeah.
It's a good question. I think what's super popular and kind of people are working on a lot these days is just shooting in stride and being deceptive with your shot. And I think as the goalies get better, I know me and Tim Turk have talked about this a little bit on a podcast I did with him, but just shooting in stride, being as deceptive as possible, and also the ability to shoot off both feet and not get stuck in this mindset of only shooting one way, right? You'll see a lot of different shooting style. Every time you share a shooting video, I'll never get more comments than when I share a shooting video. I shared one shooting video a while ago where I literally did it just to get comments. And it was like 75 comments of people giving me their tips. And like, I wasn't even looking for tips on my actual shot. I thought my shot was pretty solid, but I just got lit up, which is great because there is a million ways to do it. There's a million different shooting strides. You can shoot off your inside leg, outside leg. You can jump shoot, all these different kind of things, right? So not getting hung up and just shooting one way and figuring out what works in what situation, right? And as the game evolves, there's a million different situations where you got to be able to get off a different kind of shot. So always be working on that. Like I said, outside leg, inside leg, winding it up, slap shot, half clappers, quick snapshots off your toe, pull in shots, so that's kind of a long-winded answer to a short question, but just don't get stuck in one mindset of shooting. Learn different ways to do it.
No, that's actually, I think that's a great answer, right? You can never predict in a game when you're going to have the opportunity to shoot a puck. So you should be comfortable shooting in a bunch of different ways so that when the opportunity presents itself, no matter what position you're in, you have some basis and some confidence in the ability to release that shot.
Yeah.
So I like it. Good answers. So it's always fun to see how these conversations go.
Yeah, it's fantastic.
On one thing and we kind of snake down the path a little bit, but it's always fun to see.
But I think coaching, like for me, it's been such a complex thing. It's like you think it's going to be one thing, but then it's another thing. And then like even getting back to like the conversations between other coaches, I've had conversations with pretty experienced coaches online where they started off from a super negative place, but by the end of it, and maybe even looking back 2-3 months later on the conversation, I learned a ton from that, just having a conversation back and forth and just seeing what the guy was actually trying to get across to me. Wasn't coming from the best place at the time, but maybe it was. But that's why it's always good to keep things positive, keep an open mind, and just always be willing to learn different things. And I think once I was able to do that, and once I took some of the ego out of my coaching, I just became a better coach overnight, right? I stopped trying to think I knew it all. I stopped trying to pretend online and in life that I knew it all. And I just started being a sponge for information and trying to learn as much as I can. And I think that's a better way to go. If you do know it all, great. Good for you, all right? You're on the right track. But if you don't pretend to. You don't have to know it all overnight. You don't have to be an expert. You don't have to be Scotty Bowman. He didn't get there overnight. Nobody does. It's about putting in the hours, putting in the work. And like Kevin said, if you expect your players to do it, you got to do it as a coach as well. You got to study the game. You got to evolve. You got to keep growing with the game or else you're going to get left behind. So
yep. And be authentic, right?
Yeah.
A good coach is a good communicator.
I agree, and I think
and kids are smart. They'll sniff you out if you're fronting. They'll find it real quick.
I agree. I think that's a fantastic point. Be yourself because everybody's different and everyone learns differently and everybody relates to people differently. And people want to learn from me. Some people want to learn from Kevin. Some people want to learn from the next guy. Some people like my style. Some people don't. Some people want that's it. So just be yourself because the world needs whoever you are, right? You might reach that one kid just by being you and telling your story that me or Kevin couldn't reach because our stories are different, our backgrounds are different, our message is different. And Kevin touched on it earlier. We can run the same drill, same practice, but get different results just based on who you are. So just because you see one coach doing one thing one way, take what you like from that, think about it for yourself, and add it to what you are and what you're doing. And this is also not a message to coaches, but a message to myself as well. So